Doing today, sir?
Pretty good. Other than, no, the normal, panicked. I haven't written it. Every day's the same. I haven't written it,
We're sitting in your studio right now. Would you say, because the last time I spoke to you was at Warner Brothers in their studio, would you say
I had written it at that point.
Is this where you spend like 7 days a week, or is it like 5 days a week?
8 days a week.
Really?
No, 7 days a week. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I spent, 98% of my life has been spent in this room, I would have thought.
Is it something because, do you really work, are you a 7 day a week person, or do
Pretty much. I try to make it 6 days, but it doesn't ever quite work out. I'm always behind, which is entirely my own doing, because I suppose I'm a perfectionist.
Well, I'm definitely curious about the way you work. When I speak to writers, a lot of writers talk about like the golden hour in the morning, like they have a 2-3 hour thing, and like some writers I speak to, screenwriters, they will work from 9 to 5. As a composer, I'm curious, is there a set schedule that
I work best at night. The good ideas sort of start coming around 1 o'clock in the morning, but then there's a lot of, because so much of my stuff is, sound design or just programming away or just orchestrating. So, the original ideas, the melodies and concepts come at 1 o'clock in the morning, but then there's all that other time that I can fill up with just during the normal labor that goes into actually making a composition work.
I'm getting to talk to you for a few different things today. Let's jump in right from the start with a rewind, which is Man of Steel. I was driving over here. I'm listening to the soundtrack. I effing love it. I told you this a while ago. Now that people have had a chance to hear it, again, one of my favorites of the year. Has it been sort of like gratifying to put that much work and time in, and people being so enthusiastic about it?
Well, there's sort of two stages which I love. The creative process, the actual making it. Just process is great. I mean, that's sort of my favorite part. And then the other favorite part is the first time we actually show it to an audience. And you actually make it for people, and people are loving it, and people are really enjoying it. Those are the moments that I love the most. Going to the premiere party is about the thing I dread the most. I'm not good outside this room. I love being in here and making things. And so I suppose I'm relatively dull.
Well, I'm definitely. You've done a lot of iconic scores, a lot of great stuff, and I'm just curious, what is it like for you, like hearing the recognition from fans and from people that listen to your work and saying, "Hey, you did a great job with this." Is it something that you know what I mean?
No, no, it's this sort of strange thing. I write a piece of music, and I sort of write it here, and in this complete privacy. And at the same time, what it really becomes is I'm having a conversation with all these people I don't know, and it moves them, or it excites them, or it provokes them. It's not always a good conversation that comes back. Sometimes it's just, like, I hate this rubbish, or whatever, you're the worst composer on earth, etc. But it's this sort of weird conversation I'm having with so many people all across the world without ever really knowing each other. But it feels like the music is talking to them, and in a peculiar way, of course, with the internet now, they all feel they have a right to talk back. And really, I mean, it's exciting and it's nice. It's genuinely nice, to have somebody get excited about a piece of music. Because I think the worst thing would be to just sort of write in a vacuum and just, you're writing good things, but nobody ever gets to hear it and nobody ever gets to respond. So you don't have that weird, strange, being part of the sort of fabric of society thing going on.
Jumping into Ron Howard's Rush, I think that movie is really great, and love the music, love the film. Ron Howard did such a great job with it. Talk a little bit about how you first got involved in the project, and let's start with that.
Well, it's an odd one, this one, because I got involved obviously because Ron asked me, but it's an independent film. It's an indie movie, and Ron doing this indie movie, and in a funny way, I'm the bridge. But really, what happened was, because it's an indie movie, and it really was, Andrew Eaton and the Eric Fellner at working title, and I started at working title. My beautiful laundrette. All my early movies were working title indie movies, and so for me it was sort of going full circle. But at the same time, for Ron, the adventure was to be taken completely out of his comfort zone of doing a big studio picture, and working in this sort of indie framework. And I think it was actually genuinely exciting for him. I mean, I think he loved this more than anything else. I think it's one of his best movies. I had this conversation with James Hunt's team manager from the 1976, the McLaren team manager, who was telling me all the great James Hunt stories. But one of the things he said was, yes, they worked really hard. That 76 season was really hard, and these guys were really on, but he'd never seen anybody work as hard as Ron Howard does. His sort of dedication to just being there at 5 a.m. in the morning and still watching dailies at 11 o'clock at night. And yes, he is a 7-day guy as well. So the whole process was like this. We had no money, or, we had an indie budget. I'm sorry. And just taking Ron out of this normal way of working, I think, was really, really exciting. I think it shows in the movie. I mean, there was a point where we didn't even know if we could shoot any races. This whole movie, Peter Morgan's script, actually works without any of the races in it, because we didn't know if we would ever have the money, or if we could have the visual effects, or if we could get the cars. I mean, the cars, for instance, most of the cars used in the movie are the real thing, and they all belong to very, very rich, CEOs of, billionaires. And Ron basically persuaded them that they would come and drive their cars in the movie. And sometimes he felt a little bit peculiar, telling some CEO of some multi-billion corporation, hey, can we do another take? Or, can you just wait a bit, or whatever, What if the guy got a message on his BlackBerry that his company was tanking or something, and he'd suddenly lose his driver or something like that. So the whole thing was done in that sort of very indie style, whereby we just make things up as we went, and it was a very nice way of working.
I'm definitely, with writing the score for that film, for Rush, were you looking at dailies? I'm definitely talking a little bit about the writing process on it, and also, has the writing process changed along the way?
Well, so here's again, I suppose, where this working title, Peter Morgan, Ron Howard thing, sort of played a big role, because we all knew each other. So as soon as Peter had written the script, I got to see it. And then we all got together in a room, and we just started talking about the music. And partly we were talking about songs, because, it's a period piece. So we were talking about the songs which we would like to have, which of course we could never afford. And we were just talking about, what should the score do? So really the concepts were sort of done before Ron ever went out to shoot. I sort of knew what I wanted to write, sort of knew what the sound was going to be like. Plus, I knew that the main sound, the main instrument in this movie was going to be the roar of the engines. And so how was I going to go and navigate around this? And again, this is sort of where it comes back to Peter's words, because at the end of the day, it's really a character piece. So the racing parts were less important. But how to balance those characters out, and Peter always does this thing to me, whereby he writes these characters. In a normal movie you have the bad guy and you have the good guy, and you know where you're heading. Peter always writes these balanced characters, and so it becomes really tricky because the music can easily tip your character in the wrong way. I mean, in Frost Nixon, the last thing I wanted to do was make Richard Nixon into a sympathetic character.
I understand exactly what you're saying. So you were writing music before they were filming. I'm definitely curious. Were you writing, like, how much was written prior to seeing, like, the rough cut, if you will? You know what?
But Dan and Mike, Ron's editors, who were the only two people really from his team, from his normal team, that were on this movie, they work so fast. So, we had certain sort of bits and pieces, and I had the beginnings of the main theme, but a lot of it was improvised. I mean, a lot of it was just sort of, we weren't trying to do a 70s score, but at the same time we were sort of embracing the thing that I knew really well to do, which is, form a band, get into a room, make music. So a lot of it was written literally with Ron just, being sort of part of the band, sitting, on the couch and, hey, what if the tune went this way? What if the tune went that way? What moves you? What do you think is appropriate? Is it too heroic? Is it, all those things. And even Peter Morgan hanging out in the room. So it became very, very collaborative. And different things would be taking place at different... I can't really remember what was written beforehand and was written during the process. Because one of the luxuries we actually had was we did have quite a bit of time of just sort of fiddling around with it and just playing around with it. Because there is quite a lot of visual effects work in this film, and that buys the composer a lot of time.
I'm definitely curious about you. Obviously, you work all the time, but are you ever in here or at home or wherever and sort of coming up with things that maybe don't work for the particular project you're working on now, but you sort of are like, that's a really good melody, that's a really good thing?
Not really. It's like, I wouldn't know how to write concert music or how to write a symphony or something like this. I need a story. I hang it onto the story. I hang everything onto the characters. And, I mean, Rush isn't a particularly melodious score, it's very often it's just textures and it's just exciting guitar stuff, etc. I try to let be good enough that it can stand up on its own 2 feet. I mean, I think if you listen to the soundtrack album, you're not going to be completely bored by it. But at the same time, I really need the story. I need the story more than I need the images.
I put on Twitter that I was going to be talking to you today. A number of people wanted to know if you are definitely working on the Spider-Man sequel, and let me start with that.
I am.
So I have a question from someone, and I thought it was very, very good. If you're scoring the Spider-Man sequel, will you throw a call back to Spider-Pig from the Simpsons movie?
No, I will not. But you have no idea how tempting it is. Yes, exactly. Because I've ruined it once before with Spider-Pig. No. It's like every once in a while in the conversation, that it's sort of somebody mentions it. No, not in a serious way, of course. No, I can't do that. But I do have some ideas. I just I'm sort of grappling with a completely different way of doing it right now, and literally it's just the laboratory doors are open right now, and I have an idea. I haven't played it to anybody yet, so I don't even know if it's going to work yet, because you never know. Music is this weird, undefensible thing, it either resonates with you or it doesn't. I either get the tone right or I won't, but it's serious experimentation time at the moment.
Has Mark shown you a rough cut too?
Oh, yeah. I have a movie.
A lot of people are very excited for the sequel, myself included. I think one of the things, not to put myself in this, but one of the things about his first film that really works were the relationships. And
you have no idea how well the relationships work in this one. I mean, that is what he's masterful about. I mean, truly, truly, truly wonderful. I mean, and the movie just sort of sparkles whenever, I mean, because it could be so easily a movie driven by action, and it really is driven by charm and love and sparkling dialogue and just the chemistry between the characters is fantastic.
I think that's also that's true with every one of these summer movies. If you don't have characters that you care about, the action is meaningless.
Right.
And it really does come down to, do you care about the people on screen?
Right, exactly. And and look, I've done a lot of action. I've done a lot of buildings falling down recently and things exploding. So I'm sort of trying to figure out, is there a slightly different way of doing it? And I'm not sure yet, but I'm certainly working on it.
Well, I was going to say, is there because you're doing Winter's Tale, and then you have Spidey. Is it where you can work on both at the same time, or is it like, I'm doing Winter's Tale, when that's done, I'll move into Spidey?
Today is a Spidey day.
Oh, actually, literally today.
Yeah, literally today is a Spidey day. And then Monday will be a Winter's Tale day again. It's I don't really like dividing them up like this. It's just I'm starting very early on Spider-Man. They're still in a rough cut sort of. I'm actually starting sort of a month early, but because I want to experiment, I'm just using that time to experiment. And Winter's Tale is actually at a place now where I've written all the tunes. Everything is really in place. It's just a matter of orchestrating and moving some things around and sort of fine-tuning things. So really my main focus right now is Spider-Man. And at the same time, at the back of my mind, constantly I'm inventing stuff for Interstellar.
That was going to be my next thing that I was going to... believe me, when I put on Twitter I'm talking to you, you can be assured that the Nolan questions pop up in a exponential level. Obviously, I loved Inception, the music you did. And Interstellar sounds, from what I understand, sounds awesome. I mean, this is Nolan. So is there added pressure when it's a Nolan movie, and especially with the reaction from people?
Only insofar that weirdly, I'm a bit ahead on that one. Circumstances beyond my control. I wrote him a main theme in January
of this year.
Yeah, while he was writing. It was something. Sometimes it's nice for a screenwriter not to just sit there all by himself, but to have maybe a little piece of music to,
Sure.
inspire. So without, and I'm being vague, and I'm being in full Chris Nolan mode, where I will not give anything away, but there's a tune, there's a theme there, and the other thing is we had this sort of conversation about, 9 years we spent in our Batman world, and the textures and the music and the sounds and the thing we sort of created has sort of seeped into other people's movies a bit.
Yeah.
And so it's time to reinvent. The endless string ostinatos need to go by the wayside. The big drums are probably in the bin. And so right now it's just this sort of time where I'm sort of just pondering what else we can do, and there are a few ideas. I mean, of course, there are a few ideas. the challenge isn't, oh, it's a Chris Nolan movie. The challenge is, Chris feels the same challenge. I mean, I think, let's do something new. We have something to say. There's something. He really has got something to say. There's a solid backbone to this thing, and it's an important story. And we want to tell it in a way that nobody else has ever done. And the same goes for the music, of course. In a strange way, it was odd having to, and thank God, it became this sort of stopping point after the third one. We are done with Batman. Because when James Newton Howard and I started on the first one, we did it together, really. We never thought we would have to go and stretch this sort of material over 3 movies. I mean, the whole point was I was trying to do this sort of minimalist thing, which would survive,
Sure.
for 2 hours in one movie, and then it had to come back, and it had to come back yet again, and the weird way it sort of became so much part of the sort of action movie vocabulary. It really started to dilute us, what we were doing. And, people always blame the temp or, whatever, somebody temps it because it comes from a successful movie. It's not that. That's not why people temp it into other movies or why you hear that sort of style in other movies. It's actually because it works, and it's like Thin Red Line used to get temped into every movie. I mean, I remember one week seeing it in 4 completely different movies. One was a urban drama, one was a animated thing. I can't remember what the other 2 were, but this one piece from Thin Red Line worked in all of those movies very well as a temp, but Thin Red Line wasn't a great commercial success, so that's not what a director's after. A director's after something that moves him, and if they hear a piece of music that moves them, they would like to have something like it. So I don't think it was the success of the Batman movies really that made that style spread like a bad virus through so many other movies. It was just we came up with something that seemed to be appropriate for where we are and musically in time at the moment.
100%. I'm running out of time with you. I have 2 other questions I definitely want to ask. I loved your work on the Sherlock Holmes with Sherlock Holmes with Guy Ritchie, and a lot of people wanted me to ask.
With the Guy Ritchie.
The Guy Ritchie. A lot of people wanted me to ask if you're going to collaborate with him on Man from U.N.C.L.E.
I have no idea, really honestly, because I just, once I'm really in full Interstellar mode, I'm just going to go and be in full Interstellar mode. And I think it just might not work out time-wise. I mean, look, I love Guy, and I'd love to do something else with him. But, if it's not this, then I'm sure, we'll meet up again.
I definitely want to jump backwards as a little palate cleanser before jumping into something else. One of my favorite scores that you did was True Romance. I wanted to jump back to working with Tony Scott. And do you have any sort of memories of collaborating on that one? And what do you remember about that?
God, hang on. I'm trying to be. Tony was a particular type of guy. I mean, he was so outrageous most of the time that you have to pick your stories very carefully because it's not even to protect the innocence. It's just. Tony offered me my first movie ever in this town. I was still living in London, and he'd be phoning up, and he'd be saying things like, "Hey, do you ride motorbikes?" I'm going, no, I don't ride motorbikes. He goes, "That doesn't matter. You just come on the back of mine, and we go into the desert, and at night you just hear the desert." So that was that's the sort of that was my introduction to Tony Scott. That we'd go really fast. Everything had to be dangerous. If it wasn't dangerous, if it wasn't on the edge, if it didn't have, You know, if the equipment didn't start burning, we weren't doing it right. Everything, you know, if people weren't outraged by what we are doing, we weren't doing it right. You know, if somebody had done it before, you know, then it wasn't, you know, it was boring. You know, so he was pushing the envelope with everything all the time, and at the same time, you know, I mean, one of the great things about Tony was, you know, I mean, he had a wicked sense of humor, but he had a huge, big heart, and he always knew everybody's name, and everybody was included. It was just this big, rowdy family affair of him pushing us. I mean, I remember, you know, like this first movie he offered me. I mean, it basically ended with his producer going, "Hans, who? You know, forget about it." Which was actually quite lucky for me because I got Rain Man instead. You know, I was devastated I wasn't doing Tony's movie, and then I got Rain Man instead, which turned out much better than Tony's movie at the time. But then as soon as I was credible, you know, he asked me, what was the first thing we worked on? Oh, Days of Thunder. So I did actually do another, you know, and it was typical Tony style. It was down in Daytona. I went, he said, would I come down and meet the producers, Don Simpson, Jerry Bruckheimer. I went down there with a T-shirt on. We started to have this meeting, and they basically went, well, we're so behind schedule, if you leave now, we'll never get it done. We'll build your studio. So suddenly, I'm stuck in Daytona with one T-shirt, but they're building me this beautiful studio in this warehouse, etc. You know, and the one-day trip turned into 3 months, you know, of just. I learned how to drive. I learned, you know, I didn't know how to drive, so the stunt guys decided they're going to teach me how to drive. So now how to drive left really fast. It never got any better.
I do remember the Days of Thunder. I remember reading about Days of Thunder, and that was one of those productions that was really behind schedule, that had to make the date, and it was one of those movies. Or am I mistaken about all this?
Oh, no, you're completely right. You're completely right. It was complete insanity. But sort of, but again, you know, because it was Tony, he just keep it recklessly fun. I mean, I you know, it's like, actually the way the stunt guys, let me finish that story off, because the stunt guys were basically not giving me the time of day, because, you know, number one, I couldn't drive, number one, I was probably really boring, you know, and I wasn't into the sort of whole macho culture that they were into. But then I had this idea that Jeff Beck should come and play guitar, so Jeff Beck turned up, and suddenly I was the most popular guy amongst the stunt team, you know, stunts unlimited hats, stunts unlimited T-shirts, you know, whatever I wanted. And I would go out to the set with Jeff, you know, and I'd see Tony do his thing, and he'd just try to explain to these stunt guys, you know, well, we still need these cars, so just tap him lightly on the back, you know, and they'd go around, and there was never any tapping lightly. Everything would just like explode, and then everything would shut down again, and people would try to rebuild these cars. It wasn't easy, put it that way. So I came to Rush with some experience, you know. In fact, it was really helpful, you know, all the stuff I'd gone through on Days of Thunder.
I definitely want to touch on, though, there's a great, I want to get back to True Romance for 1 second, because there's a great little like melody, which I'm not going to do on, which I can't mimic.
Yeah, it's this little waltz.
Yeah, do you remember working, because I think True Romance is fucking awesome, sorry to curse, and most people do too. It's just one of those melting pots of it's just great script, great direction, great acting, great score, it's just great.
Well, the thing was, you know, I mean, look, here's a typical Tony thing. I mean, when he first came to me to let's do True Romance, he had a proper music budget, and it was going to be, you know, the normal thing. We were going to go and have an orchestra, whatever you do, you know. And then he went off to shoot the movie, and then he came back and he said, look, I'm really sorry, but I spent all the money. I have money left for 9 musicians. And I was really pissed off at him. You know, it's like our relationship was always like this. You know, it's like, you know, he'd promise you can have the whole orchestra, and then he'd spend all the money on visual effects or something like this. You know, and then, so it was another one of those. And all I remember was as a kid being, you know, in Germany in music class where we had these xylophones and marimbas, etc., and Karl Orff music. You know, that's what we were learning, and it was just a horrible noise, but it was sort of an innocent noise. You know, I mean, imagine a whole class playing these little marimbas, you know, and nobody could hit the right note, and everybody was out of time. And I thought, you know, okay, so Tony, you took away all the money. All you're going to get is these little marimbas and basically kids playing it. But I thought there was a great juxtaposition as well between the violence and this very innocent music. And I thought it went really well with the characters. And fair enough, I mean, it's pretty much the same idea as Terry Malick used in Badlands. I mean, except he used the real Karl Orff piece. And I hadn't seen Badlands at that point. It wasn't until I started working with Terry that I actually saw Badlands and went, oh, you know, it's not that, you know. Somebody else heard that. It's actually called school music, Schulmusik, that, you know, the Karl Orff piece. But I just thought that'd be something really cool about doing something which was so wacky and so innocent and so pure and so childish and so childlike. Because, you know, whenever the violence gets really crazy, I mean, you know, like you know, after Kristen Slater kills Gary Oldman, and she's saying, that's so, and you think she's going to say dreadful or terrible or how could you, and she goes, that's so romantic. You know, and it's this sort of little girl's perspective on the world. And I mean, that's really, you know, part of it is design, part of it was just, you know, again, Tony pushing the envelope and going, hey, can we come up with something really, you know, it's not strange enough. I mean, that used to be, you know, he used to say that all the time to me. It's not strange enough.
It's something that's coming out for most people in a week. 12 Years a Slave. Saw it at Toronto, easily like one of the best films of the year. Going to be a player at the end of the year with like awards. It's a great movie. Talk a little bit about collaborating with Steve on it, and how early on did you get involved in the project?
I don't know. Steve and I had this sort of conversation, I think a year before he started making the movie. It was just a conversation amongst, you know, he likes what I do and I like what he does. And then he sort of phoned me out of the blue and said, actually he was here in Los Angeles because he was setting up the film. And then he sort of phoned me out of the blue and said, you know, hey, I've done this movie, can I show it to you? And of course, I loved it. What's not to love? I mean, it's an amazing piece of work. But I felt I wasn't, you know, I sort of felt I wasn't the guy in a way, you know. I felt it was such an important, heavy, incredible subject, you know. Why is he picking me? So it took a bit of persuading from him, just to give me the confidence to do it. But he's such a, you know, he's such a lovely man. You know, I mean, he's the real thing. You know, and like Tony in a funny way. I mean, the thing about Tony was you would follow him to the end of the earth, and with Steve, you follow him to the end of the earth. It's as simple as that. You know. I remember it's another Tony thing. You know, it's a movie I hadn't worked on, and some of the crew was coming over here to just take a break from the insanity, and they said this was the worst experience we ever had, and at the same time it was the best experience we ever had. And I said, why? They said, Tony. You know, so which was quite the opposite actually on 12 Years a Slave, where it was one of the best experiences I ever had, because Steve is just so open and so inclusive and so loving. That's the only way I can describe him. And so clear about his direct. I mean, or maybe it's just clear to me. You know, I can't remember which piece of music it was, which cue it was, but he said, you know, the way it should end is just the way. Imagine a white canvas and just the way a paintbrush leaves the canvas. Oh yeah, I get that. You know, there was a wonderful way of describing how you get out of a scene. And at the same time, you know, I think important movies are very few and far between. Movies that actually mean something and actually, not in a pretentious way. You know, and Brad Pitt said it in Toronto, so it's not my line, but I think he's absolutely right. It took an Englishman to make a story about one of the great tragedies of America. And, you know, while, for instance, Rush, for me, was a real period piece. You know, it was really set in, 1976, I could feel it. 12 Years a Slave, which is truly a period piece, I constantly kept thinking is addressing our current, it's set in the present. It's set in this time because it's the conversation we've never had. It's the conversation we still need to have. And if it does anything, it should start a conversation. And I think that's what he does brilliantly in a not a didactic way. And the way it just sort of unblinkingly and very simple, there are no tricks in this movie, which is other, the great trick in the movie is it's a great story, it's beautiful cinematography, and the acting is extraordinary. I mean, I don't think people, I hope people realize, other than Chiwetel, who's of course peerless in this movie. I mean, Michael Fassbender, what the courage he shows to be that dark, to go that far, it's like, I mean, I think the whole project was just, Steve is a great leader, just like Tony was a great leader.
Well, you touched on something there which I totally agree with, which is the film presents the material without sort of, it presents it very simply,
yeah,
but very powerfully.
Yes.
Like you're, it's not overly directed, it's like you're there.
Absolutely.
And when you're writing music to accompany those visuals, do you sort of, how is that, when it's not, you know what I mean, when it's not...
The music on the whole is actually very beautiful. It's I'm trying to avoid really saying what I was trying to write because that's why I was writing music.
Sure.
That's why Steve wanted me to write music, because at a certain point words and they just get in the way of the thing, of what we were trying to do. But I think the music, other than in a couple of places, is never trying to be cruel or never try to show the, it never tries to make you feel sad or manipulate you in a certain way. It's actually quite translucent, and maybe in a funny way, it's sort of it's hopeful, and it's benign. But I mean, one of the things which Steve automatically brings out in you, I mean, he's a great artist, so you automatically, you write from a slightly different perspective. This man has, major art credentials. So it does come in, the aesthetics really do come into play. But at the end of the day, you have to leave all that aside, because what he did was, he just presents you with this very honest, very unblinking look at a past that I think is not dealt with. And, look, I'm a German. I think it took an American, took Steven Spielberg to make Schindler's List and address the Holocaust. And I think There's something interesting about foreigners coming in, and not not in a judgmental way. It really is not a movie that is judgmental in any way. It just describes, it just states that these were the times, those were the morals of the times. This is what happened to this man. And in Toronto, I was not in a cynical way, but just those last 5 minutes. I know this movie like the back of my hand. I just sat back and I just listened to the room, and there was the sound of the audience, the emotion of the audience, and then it cuts to black and there was complete silence in the best possible way, where I knew he had devastated them in the right way. And it was very powerful. And I think that's what filmmaking should be. Filmmaking at its best leaves you breathless, leaves you devastated, leaves you wanting to have a conversation, makes you want to look to your neighbor and go, can we talk about this for a moment? Because I can't quite deal with it just by myself.
I think that 12 Years a Slave and Gravity both are phenomenal on so many levels, but those are the two I think that everyone are. I'm sure you're hearing the buzz on both films.
Yes, absolutely.
Those are the two. I definitely want to touch on a few other things, if you don't mind. A film that I'm looking forward to is Winter's Tale. Are you finished with that? Or are you still?
Oh no, I'm way in the middle of it. It's a labor of love. Everybody thinks Hans is always working on these blockbusters, and we're talking about 3 pieces which were really made strictly because we needed to make them, because we loved them, because they're labors of love, and what better way to spend your time than work on a labor of love. And again, I get to use it. I get to be in a completely different world. I get to use a completely different style, which is what I like doing. I like to go. Rush and 12 Years a Slave couldn't be any more different from each other. Totally. It's important just for me that I can go, and I haven't done a great romantic love story in a long time. And if I tell you what I think the last great romantic love story is that I did, you're probably going to laugh. I think the last great romantic love story I did was Hannibal, which I always saw as a romantic comedy. And I told Whitley that. I remember saying to him, come on, it's some absurdist romantic comedy farce. And he totally agreed. He could never understand why people were, that crazy scene at the end where the dinner party, basically.
That's a really good scene.
It's a great scene, and Ridley always thought, it was a great comedy scene. It's the theatre of the absurd. But at the same time, my thing was that Clarice Starling would be pushing paper at the FBI, if anything, were it not for Hannibal Lecter. And Hannibal Lecter would be just whatever he would be, serial killer, great cook. But if they didn't have this passion for each other, they need each other. They complete each other in a way. So that was, to me, a great romantic love story. True gothic passion.
I have to ask, have you been watching Hannibal on NBC?
No, I haven't. Because of the way my life is, where I don't get home to watch television or anything like this, I have to actually, plus I'm naughty. I wait until the season is finished and I get the whole thing, and then I sort of pig out. I don't go to sleep. And
I'm giving you a thumbs up on the Hannibal NBC show.
Yeah, I hear it's great.
It's really well done.
I hear it's great.
Yeah, but getting back into Winter's Tale for a
Sorry.
second. No, I just want to definitely touch on that.
You're wandering here.
No, and it's fine. I like wide-ranging conversations. I'm definitely curious about what can you tell people about about the work that you're doing on it?
It's a really, for me, an incredibly traditional score, which is a sort of a good thing. I haven't done those in a while. You know, it's proper tunes, proper melodies, proper orchestration. I'm working with my friend Rupert Gregson-Williams, Harry Gregson-Williams' brother, who's a brilliant arranger, orchestrator, composer in his own right. It's just fun, the two of us being extraordinarily romantic. And I don't want you to misunderstand that. But no giggling from the cheap seats over there either. But no, you know, it's a story that is about magic, and it's about hope, and it's about what's our purpose on Earth. And every once in a while, I have the luxury of spending my time thinking about what is our purpose on Earth, or what is love? You know, I mean, the luxury of my existence is really that I get to deal with those sort of questions on a daily basis. You know, I mean, 12 Years a Slave is, whichever way you look at it, it's a profound love story as well. It's a man who all he wants to do is get back home to the woman he loves and the children he loves, and that's what keeps him alive. And what a luxurious existence I have to be able to ponder that.
The Man of Steel sequel is obviously filming next year, and it's obviously going to have Batman in it.
Yeah, I know. It's creating a bit of a problem in my head right now. Quite honestly, I mean, I got to sit down with Zach and have a chat with him about, you know, what he's trying to do, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to go back to that, well, it's a different Batman, Christian Bale, you know, and what I did with Chris, that needs to have its autonomous life. I don't want to go and now appropriate that and put that into the other Batman, you know.
Well, I definitely want to know, when did you hear that the sequel would have Batman, and what was your reaction with Ben Affleck? Because I'll just say, I think he'll be a very good Batman.
Of course he'll be a really good Batman. I mean, look, it's really quite simple. The man isn't a fool, and he's not going to set himself up for fall. I mean, he's a great filmmaker in his own right. He really is.
I agree with you.
He's been knocked around enough. I mean, look, we all have sins of our youth. It's just when you're an actor, you know, it's incredibly visible. I think he's become a much more astute actor, and I think he'll make a great Batman. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. So do I think it's a good idea? Yes, I think it's a good idea. I think he's great casting, especially because of all that, you know, that has been said about him. I mean, look, I think it was incredibly vicious. I think the way he got attacked was just unbelievable.
It was shocking, actually.
It was so shocking. But you know something? When Chris cast Heath Ledger as the Joker, maybe we weren't quite as big yet. You know, maybe it wasn't quite as visible. But there's a lot of that going on as well, that was complete miscasting. How could you? Only Jack Nicholson can play the Joker. I mean, you guys, what are you doing? And partly, you know, the secrecy surrounding, for instance, a Chris Nolan project is not really secrecy, it's privacy. Because we have to be able to work in private. We have to try things out. We have to fail in the comfort of our own little studios and our own little cutting rooms, etc. You know, to figure out what we're really trying to do. It's all a laboratory. It's all an experiment. And the last thing you want to do is, and I've been on movies where, you know, I was on one movie, I'm not going to tell you which one, where a journalist from the LA Times came to a preview and reviewed our work in progress. And it truly, I mean, we were just trying something out. We were just putting something in front of an audience to see, you know, hey, what do you think? Will it work? You know, we have to learn from these things, and you have to learn in privacy. And the other thing is, we don't really want to tell everybody what the movie is going to be. I mean, I think Dark Knight is a perfect example of everybody knowing we were making a Batman movie, but when it came out, it's certainly not the movie they expected. It certainly was different, and I think isn't that part of the joy, that we give you something that you don't expect?
Listen, I'm in full agreement with you, and I've had this conversation with other people. I wish more movies were mysterious, and I love what J.J. Abrams does and what Nolan does, because the fact is, everything gets revealed. It's
absolutely.
Like, it's so much better to walk in not knowing, you know. But I definitely want to ask before, because I gotta go. If you have the conversation with Zach, and if he sells you on it, can you see yourself doing the sequel? Because as a fan, I want to see you doing it. But again, it would mean coming up with a new Batman theme.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, no, of course I can see myself doing it. You know, I mean, first of all, because I love working with Zach. I mean, we really had an enormous amount of. I think you can tell from that score we had a lot of fun.
Definitely.
You know, and I think it was inventive. You know, once I got over the whole, oh my God, you know, I'm not as good as John Williams thing, but I'm different.
Sure.
You know, and it's different times, and you know, I just had a, you know, I mean, I am sensitive to criticisms as everybody else. You know, and somebody saying, oh well, it wasn't like the John Williams thing because it didn't start off with the big fanfare and all that stuff. Our movie starts differently. There's no room for big fanfare. You can't have a big fanfare, you know, with the way we reveal this planet, we reveal the birth of this child.
I'm going to interrupt for a second and say that's absolutely, like, it's shocking to me because the first 45 minutes of Man of Steel is amazing. It is just flat out amazing. I'm saying it right here. I mean, everyone knows how I feel. It is, I want to say it one more time, amazing. So, whatever to anyone who doesn't agree.
Yeah, but you know, it's like anything. I mean, you look, I don't know what I'm doing. I just try to do my best.
Sure.
You know, and I try to enjoy the process, and I try to not let my, you know, fellow brothers down that are working on this film. You know, I don't try to let Zach down. You know, so in other words, you know, if Zach and I are having this conversation and I don't have an idea, you know, it will be more than one conversation as well. I mean, you know, Man of Steel was a few conversations before I came up with any ideas. You know, these things aren't easy, you know, because they have to come from an idea and they have to come from a concept. Some intellectual framework has to exist, and then the notes come from that. You know, and you have to have an idea that you can get excited about. But I don't know. I mean, if you've ever met Zach, you know, there's a guy that can get you excited.
Yeah, he's filled with passion and energy.
He's filled with passion. You know, and that's the thing. You know, at the end of the day, I don't want to give up this life of feeling passionate about things, of getting excited about getting up in the morning, you know, of inventing, of trying things out, you know, of things going wrong, or, you know, the Tony method, as close to the edge as you possibly can get. You know, if the equipment isn't burning, you're not doing it right.
I'm going to leave you on that because that's a great ending.
I got involved obviously because Ron asked me, but it's an independent film. It's an indie movie, and Ron doing this indie movie, and in a funny way, I'm the bridge. But really, what happened was, because it's an indie movie, and it really was, you know, Andrew Eaton and the Eric Fellner at working title, and I started at working title. You know, my beautiful laundrette, all my early movies were working title indie movies, and so for me it was sort of going full circle. But at the same time, for Ron, the adventure was to be taken completely out of his comfort zone of doing a big studio picture and working in this sort of indie framework. And I think it was actually genuinely exciting for him. I mean, I think he loved this more than anything else. I think it's one of his best movies. I had this conversation with James Hunt's team manager from the 1976, the McLaren team manager, who, was telling me all the great James Hunt stories. But one of the things he said was,
How are you doing today, sir?
pretty good. Other than, no, the normal, panicked, I haven't written it. Every day's the same. I haven't written it,
We're sitting in your studio right now. Would you say, because the last time I spoke to you was at Warner Brothers in their studio, would you say that,
I had written it at that point,
is this where you spend like 7 days a week, or is it like 5 days a week?
8 days a week.
Really?
No, 7 days a week. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I spent, 98% of my life has been spent in this room, I would have thought.
Is it something because, do you really work, are you a 7 day a week person, or do
Pretty
you,
much. I try to make it 6 days, but it doesn't ever quite work out. I'm always behind, which is entirely my own doing, because I suppose I'm a perfectionist.
Well, I'm definitely curious about the way you work. When I speak to writers, a lot of writers talk about like the golden hour in the morning, like they have a 2-3 hour thing, and like some writers I speak to, screenwriters, they will work from 9 to 5. As a composer, I'm curious, is there a set schedule that
I work best at night. The good ideas sort of start coming around 1 o'clock in the morning, but then there's a lot of, because so much of my stuff is, sound design or just programming away or just orchestrating. So, the original ideas, the melodies and concepts come at 1 o'clock in the morning, but then there's all that other time that I can fill up with just during the normal labor that goes into actually making a composition work.
I'm getting to talk to you for a few different things today. Let's jump in right from the start with a rewind, which is Man of Steel. I was driving over here. I'm listening to the soundtrack. I effing love it. I told you this a while ago. Now that people have had a chance to hear it, again, one of my favorites of the year. Has it been sort of like gratifying to put that much work and time in, and in people being so enthusiastic about it?
Well, there's sort of two stages which I love. The creative process, the actual making it. Just process is great. I mean, that's sort of my favorite part. And then the other favorite part is the first time we actually show it to an audience. And you actually make it for people, and people are loving it, and people are really enjoying it. Those are the moments that I love the most. Going to the premiere party is about the thing I dread the most. I'm not good outside this room. I love being in here and making things. And so I suppose I'm relatively dull.
Well, I'm definitely. You've done a lot of iconic scores, a lot of great stuff, and I'm just curious, what is it like for you, like hearing the recognition from fans and from people that listen to your work and saying, "Hey, you did a great job with this." Is it something that you know what I mean?
No, no, it's this sort of strange thing. I write a piece of music and I sort of write it here, and in this complete privacy. And at the same time, what it really becomes is I'm having a conversation with all these people I don't know, and it moves them, or it excites them, or it provokes them. It's not always a good conversation that comes back. Sometimes it's just like I hate this rubbish or whatever. You're the worst composer on earth, etc. But it's this sort of weird conversation I'm having with so many people all across the world without ever really knowing each other. But it feels like the music is talking to them, and in a peculiar way, of course, with the internet now, they all feel they have a right to talk back. And really, I mean, it's exciting and it's nice. It's genuinely nice, to have somebody get excited about a piece of music. Because I think the worst thing would be to just sort of write in a vacuum and just, you're writing good things, but nobody ever gets to hear it and nobody ever gets to respond. So you don't have that weird, strange, being part of the sort of fabric of society thing going on.
Jumping into Ron Howard's Rush, I think that movie is really great, and love the music, love the film. Ron Howard did such a great job with it. Talk a little bit about how you first got involved in the project, and let's start with that.
Well, it's an odd one, this one, because